So this one's a little bit so you're not touching that.
Oh, I'm ready to go.
Oh, you good? You be the cameraman? So yeah, I'll be the cameraman.
Okay. Hey, Jordan, I wasn't able to go live on the Indra's page after all, so we'll get you the video afterwards. Okay. All righty. Okay.
Yes, 3VR.
Hello, everybody. How are you today?
Hey, great.
It is so amazing to be having an in-person meeting with my fellow human beings. We are living in some really crazy, trying times. It already was really crazy and trying, and then it totally escalated in the craziness, and it's kind of like we're living in a dystopian future. In fact, I drove past the APD headquarters, and there's like tent cities on one side, and then APD headquarters is boarded up on the other side, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of changes going on. But being a conscious human being, I choose to focus on the beauty that we have going on in the world and the opportunity that we have. So we're currently going through some times that has a lot of transformation. And there's a small group of people that are not very friendly, that are very selfish and evil, and they are trying to seize this opportunity to transform things for the worse, more dark. But we have the same opportunity in order to transform things for the better. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, to create some new opportunities and some alternatives to the way things are going, and they have been going, right? Everybody's talking about the new normal, and people want to reject the new normal. Well, I don't want to go back to the old normal. Things were pretty bad and rough, and all sorts of tyranny and oppression and division. So what we are gathered here today for is to talk about a radical idea that we call Freedom Cells and the Freedom Cell Network. And essentially what it is a new way to organize society. We are human beings, we're social animals, so it's only natural that we would want to have some sort of social institution or some sort of social organization. But the existing social organization, namely the state, right, that institution which has a massive geographic monopoly on the initiation of violence, and every 4 years here in the United States, a new ruler is elected, that is not serving us. So we want to try something dramatically different that isn't centralized, it isn't top-down hierarchy, it isn't coercive where people are forced to do things against their will, it doesn't pit people against one another. Rather, it's decentralized, it's peer-to-peer, it's based on mutually beneficial, non-violent, voluntary associations. And that's exactly what it is, the Freedom Cell Network. It's an idea that I myself came up with back in 2014. And then I kind of pulled back. I gave some speeches and some podcasts and didn't really catch on a whole lot. And then my good friend Derek Rose, who is an awesome activist, has a huge network. He took the idea and ran with it and spread it on a global level. And I just want to show you guys something that's super exciting here. This is on the Freedom Cells website, freedomcells.org, which I invite you guys, if you're not on the website, to join. You can register. And it's basically like an alternative social network with no censorship. And the really cool feature of it is this member map. So I just want to show you the scale of what it is that we're talking about. It's not just an idea like it was at one point. It's actually turned into a real life social organization. So on the website, you can go to a member map and you can put your address or the park down the street or Starbucks if you want privacy. I would recommend. And I just want to show you guys real quick how extensive the network is. And each one of these dots on the map will represent a person that's participating. So what we have here today is a global network. All of these dots represent somebody that's hip to this idea and wants to participate. And as we'll talk about later, there's this really cool, innovative structure that this social organization takes. The social organization, the state that we have is like, there's a very small group of people that makes decisions that affect everyone in this massive geographic area, including Alaska and Hawaii and Puerto Rico and stuff. And I think that's really an old, dated way to do things. With the technology, with shift in consciousness that everyone's going through these days, I think it's time that we abandon that. And so what we want to do is create, what we have done is create a vehicle where we can all ride together to the future. With peace and love and harmony and freedom and all that good stuff, man. So I'm just going to zoom in real quick on Texas, because I'm going to do a series of meetups. We're going to be going to Oklahoma in a couple weeks, but these are all the people participating in Texas. You can see here's Austin, Texas. There's a great pocket of people in Houston, which is where my buddy Derek Rose is from. And then Dallas-Fort Worth is really leading the way. And later on, we're going to hear from Lisa Bowman, who lives in Oklahoma. She's really advanced and has a great group that's organizing and doing cool stuff. And then we're also going to hear from a woman named April, who's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, just to kind of give some inspiration. They're actually a little more ahead of the curve and advanced than what we are in our group here in Austin. But here we are today, and I'm hoping after this meeting, we all stay connected. Many of you are already connected, but I'm hoping we stay connected and we get organized, right? There's a whole lot of people that share the ideas of liberty, higher consciousness, being good human beings. And I've experienced that, and I've met a whole lot of people, but I think one of the things that we're lacking is organization. And if we organize ourselves, then we'll be able to better support one another through mutual aid, through achieving common goals, and mutual defense if it comes to that. All right, so I'm going to click all of our people. Okay. All right, so I have just a little brief presentation, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions or anything. And for the Zoom audience, you can raise your hand, not literally, but there's a little hand icon like Edward here, and we'll go and hear from you. But not right now, Edward, but we'll be right there with you in a second. Okay, so has anyone heard of technocracy? Yeah? So I just want to take a sec to set the stage a little bit more. I just set the stage. And here at Indra's, they set the stage already. Very beautiful. But there's this way of organizing society called technocracy. And it was an idea that came about in the 20s and 30s. And essentially, rather than a rule by politicians, which is not ideal, technocracy calls for rule by experts. And it's my belief, and a lot of people that are doing research on this, that the next phase of where things are going is going to be this rule by experts kind of scenario. We already see experts being anointed in the COVID-19 era, and it's experts and technology. And with COVID-19, of course, there's this huge, I realized a while back that really a lot of what COVID-19 is a giant marketing push for vaccines.
Yeah.
When you think about it. And so there's all this talk of the vaccines, everyone needs to get the vaccine, and if there is no vaccine, or if you don't take the vaccine, then we're going to take away privileges, and we're not going to let you travel, and you're not going to be able to be employed. And there's this technology called a COVID pass, where you have it, it's like an immunity passport, something Bill Gates talked about, and it's on your smartphone. It's like, you got a green light, so you can go to this area. It's already taking place in China and Singapore. One second, Chris. And that's essentially what people are trying to bring to fruition here. And of course, you have the smart cities, 5G technology, surveillance, and the tracking and tracing, and contact tracing. And so we want to have a radical departure for that. It's not good. Additionally, there's a lot of factors that are coming into place that are creating what I like to call a perfect storm for civil unrest. We already have massive civil unrest in this country, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 60s or 70s. I wasn't alive then, so I didn't see it, but I've researched it and studied it. There's political violence taking place, and a lot of Americans really took for granted the absence of that in this country. But now we have that in a major way. And I believe that it's only going to escalate. With COVID-19, people are already anxious. There's a lack of human connection, except for in this room. There's parents or grandparents that are passing away with children not being able to be there for them in the hospital, not being able to visit at the nursing homes. There's people that aren't visiting their significant others. There's a lack of human intimacy. Oftentimes people go to church every Sunday and that's their connection, kind of like a steam valve for the stress of the day, and pray together. All of that's been taken away, slowly but surely coming back, and a lot of people are defying and rebelling. I really think the powers that be overplayed their hand on this one. But also with the COVID-19, the governments have radically ramped up the authoritarianism and the micromanagement, like nanny state management of human beings, where people were forced into their homes, businesses were shut down. The authoritarianism has escalated greatly. People probably saw that viral video of a woman getting tased for not wearing a mask outside, and like the cheerleaders not wearing a mask, the top had the mask on his chin. I don't know if anybody's seen what's going on in Australia, but it's really bad there, where they're trying to organize anti-lockdown protests, and they would get arrested for sharing the videos, sharing the events. They don't have firearms in that country, so that may be why it's accelerated. But it's bad news bears. Thankfully, a lot of people are resisting. And then with COVID-19, also, we are experiencing some major economic problems. Even though before COVID, Donald Trump would tout how great the economy is doing and record low unemployment and the stock market's booming, all of that is built on a foundation of fraud, because simultaneously the debt is going through the roof and rising all the time. Not to mention in 2007, 2008, there was a really, the housing crisis. There were a lot of institutions that should have failed if there were market forces at play, but instead they were propped up and inflated. And so essentially the can has just been kicked down the road, and inevitably the chickens are going to come home to roost. I remember back in 2006, I would tell my dad, you got to buy silver, you got to buy gold, you got to get your money out of the stock market, the economy's going to collapse. And he said, you know, John, I could go up to the attic and get a book called How to Profit from the Upcoming Collapse, written in 1978. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me, like, oh, maybe I'm a little bit too extreme about this. But then through further study of like Austrian economics, I realized it's all the same slow collapse, and it's just being reinflated with funny money. And that's exactly what happened with all these bailouts. Everyone got a little $1,200 check. I've tried to be consistent with this, but I cashed mine, that's for sure. But the big banks and all these large corporations got trillions of dollars. And here we had another inflation of trillions of dollars. There's a lot of people that were on the verge of eviction, and the government slowed the eviction and gave everyone an extra $400 a month. And then when that came to an end, Trump had some unconstitutional executive order and said, we're going to keep that going. And the CDC was like, we're going to stop evictions because it'll spread the virus if people have to go to homeless shelters, was their rationale. But this is going to end at the end of the year, beginning of 2021. And at that time, there's going to be a lot of people that are out on the streets, and then there's going to be a lot of commercial real estate and real estate owners that aren't going to be able to pay the mortgage, and then the banks are either going to fail or there's going to be another bailout. And like I said, eventually this is all going to come home to roost. So that's bad news bears. And we have the protests going on, and Black Lives Matter, and then the Antifa, and there's riots, and there's agitators, and there's a lot of nasty stuff going on. And with the Breonna Taylor verdict, where no one essentially was held accountable, that all escalated even more so. And so if this wasn't enough, we have an election coming up in like a month and a half, and Donald Trump has already indicated that he didn't actually say this. This is just the media saying, but there's the inkling that there may not be a peaceful transition, which is another thing that Americans take for granted. Oftentimes when there's a transition of power from one group to another, there's violence, there's coup d'etats in other countries, but we have just taken for granted the stability that comes along with that. I'm not a big fan of government. The whole institution, I think, needs to go away, but at least there's some consistency and stability. We may not have that. And if Trump is reelected, the radicals on the left and Antifa and all of these people that are destroying stuff, they're going to freak out even more, and that's going to create more civil unrest. If Biden is elected, then MAGA country that thinks the election was stolen, and the Boogaloo and militia types and all this right-wing stuff, they're going to freak out. So we're pretty much screwed either way. There's going to be more and more civil unrest. The reason why I wanted to kind of throw that out there is I really want to underscore the importance of the work that we're trying to do here. Not only has the institution not served us, has not provided justice when people are hurt or killed, has enriched the few at the expense of everyone else. That's how the state works. Everyone is forced to participate by virtue of being born in this massive geographic area. And it's an institution where if one person takes from another, everyone else loses, right? And if you opt out and you're like, I'm not going to participate, I don't want to fund my own oppression, I'm going to sell this product that's not approved or whatever, armed men come and take you away and hurt you. And that's not cool at all. So this institution already wasn't serving us, but now things are getting even worse. Now I think it's critically important that we have some sort of safety net, a social safety net that isn't coercive, right? It's just people coming together, supporting one another, and helping one another. And so that's what we are brought here today to do. So let me describe how the Freedom Cell Network works and what it's all about. As I said before, it's not centralized like the state. Rather, it's decentralized and it's peer-to-peer. And it involves people cooperating voluntarily. If people don't want to jive or they don't work together, they can disassociate without any problems. And so the way that this network is set up, it's all centered around what I like to call the inner cadre. So there's an inner cadre group, which is like the foundation of the network. The inner cadre group is 8 of your closest confidants, trusted people. We choose the number 8 because there's this research that was done by a gentleman named John David Garcia, and it was popularized by a guy named Bob Podolsky. He wrote this awesome book called Flourish. He's doing something similar to what we're doing with the Freedom Cell Network. This guy, John David Garcia, his highest value was creativity. One of my highest values is freedom. Freedom and creativity kind of go hand in hand. And so he worked together with other people, and they did experiments, social experiments, to find out what is the optimal number of people to have in a group to create an environment where there's the most amount of creativity. And he found that that number was 8. Here's a little chart that he did here. So right here, this is the number of participants right here. And as you go up, it enhances the creativity and the ability to achieve goals and stuff. So 8 was the optimum number. He calls it autopoiesis. Is anybody familiar with that term? I just learned about it from researching this guy. AUTOPOIESIS. Essentially, it's a biological term where a system can self-replicate and replicate itself and duplicate itself, right? And so, as I'm going to describe, we have this built-in check and balance, a real check and balance, not the constitutional kind, where as our group grows in numbers, it remains decentralized. It replicates itself, and it doesn't allow for hierarchy or rulers or any top-down structures. So I have this little simple way. I'm hoping one day to visualize this better than just numbers and words, because really a visual representation, you can kind of imagine like a cell or like sacred geometry. When you pull out, it's the same thing, you know, and it keeps going like that. But essentially the inner cadre is 8 people. 1, 2, these are all little people here. And so those are the close personal friends. Ideally, they are close to you in geographic proximity, but they don't have to be. This can all be virtual as well, although being in person is most ideal. So you work together with these 8 people to come up with common goals, to meet regularly, to help one another in the garden, to help look out for one another's families, so on and so forth. And then the 8 people encourage the creation of other inner cadre groups. So before you know it, you have 8 groups of 8, which is approximately 64 people. We call that a middle cadre. I want to say real quick, it doesn't have to be 8 people. That's just the ideal. So if someone's like, oh, we just have 7 people or we have 10 people, doesn't matter either way. There's no top-down anything. In fact, this whole idea is like an open source idea. If somebody wants to take it and do their own little faction over here, and they're like, to hell with 8 people, it's 12 people, man. And that's cool, no worries. But what we found based on this dude's research is that 8 is the optimal number of people. So what I would like to see this group, we already are what I'd like to call the Central Texas Middle Cadre. Early on, I thought that people would have the 8 groups, and then they would encourage other groups of 8 to form. when in reality, oftentimes there's already a larger group, like what we have here today. And so we already have the middle cadre group. And what we can do from there, instead of building up, is build down. So look around. In a sec, we're going to do an exercise where we break up into groups of 8 or smaller groups. But there's already people that are connected. There's people that invited other people. So there's already an organic kind of flow going, right? And all we need to do is just organize, set the goals, and we can rock and roll. So after the middle cadre, you have a meta cadre, which is 8 groups of 64. So for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, go back to the map here. Imagine the Dallas-Fort Worth area being a middle cadre, the Austin, Texas area being a middle cadre, and the Houston area being a middle cadre. And then we link up to form a meta cadre. And so that's what it's all about. That's the structure of the organization. Now I just want to talk a little bit about some use cases. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to bring on Lisa real quick. She's in Houston. Oh, from the middle, so this could be a meta cadre. And then we link up with other meta cadres in the Oklahoma area, in London, for example. And we have what I like to call the Confederation of Freedom Cells. Or we can call it whatever we want. I don't know. Whatever it is, the point is there's already a lot of people that are supporting one another, helping one another, sharing ideas, and supporting one another. So I'm going to go to Lisa real quick. There she is. And I did forget about you, Edward. Sorry. Hey, Lisa, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, do you mind just sharing with the group real quick what some of the things that you guys have done with your intercadre or your 2 intercadres up in Oklahoma?
Sure.
Cool background, by the way.
Thanks. We're getting feedback here. Let me turn this down. Okay. Well, a few months ago, I started our sort of coffee chat to really to cope with all this COVID BS that was happening around here. And that sort of ignited our Freedom Cell group and organization. So we've been doing that since about March. We have a small group, but we're very active. We meet consistently. And last weekend, we all came together and we put in a deep mulch garden in my backyard. And that happened because Mike, who is at the Lake Gucci cell, which is east of here, he drives about 3 or 4 hours round trip each week to meet with us. He stopped and picked up a load of mushroom compost from the local farm. I had a load of free mulch delivered from our green waste site here in Tulsa. They brought out wheelbarrows and rakes and pitchforks. Alan, who I met on the Freedom Cell site, actually lives only about 5 blocks from me. He brought him and his family out, and within about 2.5 hours, we knocked out this beautiful deep mulch garden bed. I couldn't have done it by myself. It would have taken me weeks to have done this. We also had meetups where we discuss our communication network. So we have a couple of people in our group who are experienced in ham radio and CB radio, and they've offered to help anybody in our cell who wants to get a set going to do that. So we're working on that communication network as well, to where we could we'll have like a central communication hub where that person has ham and CB radio, so they can communicate with the other people around us who might just have ham or just have CB. We're working on that. We've created a skills sheet, so everyone has listed their skills, and we kind of rated it between expert, kind of intermediate, and then novice. And we also added any skills that we would like to learn so that we can trade in that way too. See what else have we been working on. We're about to do like a sign campaign, kind of like the Love Bus Liberty Tour. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. We're about to embark on that too. So we're just going to make some signs. We're going to kind of get out there and hopefully attract some new people. I created a meetup on the actual meetup site. It's called the Tulsa Voluntary Agora Society, hoping to attract new people. That's sort of the public recruitment site that we're using it that way. That way people can come out monthly who are new to it, and we'll talk about voluntarism, agorism, and freedom cells. We have a long list of things that we are going to work on as well. Agora entrepreneurship, kind of high on the list. Skillshare events, a holistic health fair, just to name a few. So we're small, but we're staying very active, and we just want to build a solid foundation. So new people will come in, and we'll all be already on solid ground.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. So to be clear, y'all have 2 intercadre groups in Oklahoma?
Okay. Yeah, so we have our Tulsa Freedom Cell group, and we connected with Mike, who's out in Lake Uchi. He's kind of out there in a cell by himself, so we also consider him part of our cell. But he's connected with 2 cells in Arkansas as well.
All right.
So at some point, we're all going to come together.
Cool. I didn't know about the Arkansas cell. That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking some time with us, Lisa, and keep up the good work.
My pleasure.
Thanks. I always
All right,
like to
thanks,
go
Sean.
to Lisa as a good example. Go off all the stuff. So, thank you so much. Oh, hey, Pam. Okay, cool. So, as you can see, there's a variety of different things that the intercadre group can do. I just want to share with you real quick. This is a Freedom Cell manual. In a sec, before we break out, I'm going to invite you all to download the Telegram app on your phone. Who has Telegram on their phone? Cool. That's a good amount of people. It's like a chat app, but it has an encryption function to have secret conversations. There's a whole lot of like-minded people that use it. And what we encourage people to do is, I created a Central Texas network group. So I want to encourage everyone to join that. And then when we break out and whenever you go forward from here, I encourage you to make a little chat group for your intercadre. And then we keep in touch as a larger group, and then we organize and do our thing as the smaller group. But whenever you join that group, you'll have a link to this this right here, which is the Freedom Cell manual. It's kind of awesome. My gosh. Here we go. And it's something that I put together, and it's kind of crowdsourced. A lot of people are participating in giving some ideas. This is an example this guy, Bob Podolsky, put together. He has what's called an Octalog, which is similar. He also piggybacks off the work of this guy, John David Garcia. So you can imagine this is a great visual representation of what this could look like and how it could scale. So imagine for a moment that each one of these octagons is one person. And this is an intercadre group, this is an intercadre group, this is an intercadre group, and this is a middle cadre, right? Now to take it a step further, imagine each one of these is a middle cadre group, right? I'm sorry, imagine this is each one a person, and that's an intercadre. And then imagine each one of these is an intercadre, and that's a middle cadre. So then you have all these middle cadres linked up. I always have like this soundtrack going in my head when I'm explaining this structure, and it's like just totally complicated and weird and losing people. Is that the case or no? Is everyone jiving with me? You got it? Okay, cool. And the way that it remains decentralized, because there's all these like haters and detractors, and they're like, how do you know this isn't just gonna get corrupt? And the answer is, I don't know. It could turn into a total failure and everyone hates each other and like we start fighting and stuff. But hopefully that's not the case. But this is how it can remain decentralized instead of becoming some sort of hierarchy. So let's say we start today, we have 8 people here, and we meet up and break. This is Leah's crew here. This is the Indra's crew here with 8 people. This is me and Becca and Emilio and Nick over here, right? And so we have a little middle cadre, like we actually do right now. But let's say our group starts to grow here in Central Texas, and all of a sudden, the structure remains the same. It just grows in number. So this was representative of one person, now it's representative of an intercadre. But the structure essentially stays the same. And you can add 10 people, 100 people, thousands of people, 10,000 people, and you essentially just get more middle cadres or meta cadres, if that makes sense. Here's a way that it has a built-in check and balance from bad actors, right? So I've done organizing for 20 years now, and one of the biggest lessons is that a lot of the problems and failures of groups and efforts and movements comes from infighting and people butting heads, and there not being an adequate mechanism already in place to address that when conflict arises, because it's inevitable, right? In this group, there's going to be conflict if we're all rocking together and doing stuff together. And so the first way to resolve that is to have a predetermined mechanism in place to resolve conflict, like nonviolent communication, for example, or there's the group mediator that everyone trusts, and they're old and wise, and they've dealt with this type of stuff before. We go to them. There's all sorts of different mechanisms and systems that people use to deal with conflict. So if there's a bad actor, maybe they have been hurtful, they've said nasty things, they're not impeccable with their word, or God forbid, they take from another part of the group or something. What I would like to see in this environment is the first thing would be to try to help the person, right? Let's say that they're abusing drugs, and because of that, they are not being the best human being and they're hurting other people. So the first thing, as a group of conscious human beings, I would hope that we would come in and try to help this person, counsel them, support them, just be there to support them. But at the end of the day, what we're building here isn't just, it's like a private society essentially, right? And while anyone, we're live streaming right now to 57 people, and I don't know how many people are on the Zoom. People can still do their thing, but we don't have to associate with them. So look, so let's say there's this group of 8 people here, and this is Johnny the a-hole. And we've tried to work with Johnny, and we've been there for him. We offered to counsel him, and we did a little group where we all got around the fire and shared with one another. We were vulnerable, but Johnny just can't seem to stop calling women nasty names and picked a fight with some people. And so here's how it works. These are all groups of 8, right? So the whole middle cadre, which would be this group, we go to a representative or someone from this group, and we're like, hey, guys, Johnny's been really problematic, and we tried to work with them. We tried to redress some of these problems, but it just continues. So if you guys, we want to still work with some of you guys, but if you guys insist on having him in your middle cadre, then we're going to disassociate from you, and can't be part of our middle cadre. So it could go down 2 ways. This is Johnny the a-hole right here. These 7 people can be like, all right, Johnny, I'm sorry. It was great while it lasted. And then they disassociate with him and just kind of absorb things stay the same. But if they don't disassociate, then the other 7 groups disassociate from the inner cadre. Just want to throw that out there because there's always conflict. And I think that this system, this organizational structure, has a lot to offer because it has these built-in checks and balances. Not like the constitutional checks and balances we're all sold on in school. All right, before we kind of open up to group and questions and stuff, I just want to talk about some use cases for the groups. So in our little manual here, and again, I'll give you guys access to this, and people provide feedback and comments and stuff, and then we take it into consideration and add it. So let's say you have your inner cadre group. There's some steps that a lot of people take to make things easier. So the first thing would be to establish a communication channel. We recommend Telegram, although that's not necessary. It could be text chat, it could be whatever. The next thing would be to create a vision and a mission statement. So an example of a vision statement, vision is like the ideal that you're striving for with your organization. The mission is like what you're gonna do in order to get there. So we have our mythical inner cadre, South Austin Scorpions. That was the original name that I had for an inner cadre back in 2015 when I was doing it with another group. That group actually fell apart because of conflict. So it's really important to be conscious of that as you're moving forward so you can address it as it happens instead of it just tearing everything apart. But here's a example vision, a free and connected South Austin where like-minded people trade with one another and provide mutual aid when their community is in need. The mission, by meeting regularly, establishing barter networks and trade routes, and working together on common goals, the South Austin Scorpions will create a more free community for ourselves and our children to enjoy. And so the thing about the mission statement is it kind of ties things together. And we have this mission, and then if someone's like, well, I think we need to spend our time doing rock and roll music, right? You're over there. But the other group's like, no, man, we don't play instruments. We don't want to do rock and roll music. Remember, we have a mission. And it's like, helps to focus people getting on order. I think doing rock and roll music is a great idea, actually, for Nerd Cadre. People rock and roll and stay together. So we come up with a vision and mission. And then the next step is to work on common goals. And so this isn't like an organization where it's like, hey, John wants you to do this and do that and need to do it this way. And here's the exact way to do it. Really what it's all about is just working together on common goals. So some groups are going to have different goals than others. Some groups are going to do their own thing. Again, it's like an open source idea. People can take it and run with it and do their own thing. So some goals that people are finding success with all the crazy stuff. I started by talking about civil unrest, is working together to have 3 months worth of food storage. At the onset back in February, I was encouraging my family and some of my high school friends to have 2 weeks worth of food storage. And then shit got real fast, and the food storage was already getting used because the grocery stores were all slammed. And so I think 3 months is an ideal goal. I'm nowhere close to that. I live in a tiny home, so I don't know how we're going to logistically do that. But the cool thing about having a group when you're working on these goals is you can chip in together and do bulk food storage purchases. There's a lot of things where the more that you buy, the less expensive it is. So that'd be hard to do as a lone wolf. If you have your 8 people together or your 64 people, you'd really buy a whole lot of stuff. Communication channel, which is already accomplished by a lot of groups. And then here's the actual goal. Some other goals are for everyone in the group to have firearms and know how to use them safely and proficiently. Sometimes when I say that, people are like, oh, I'm a peacenik, I don't want to do firearms. And that's totally okay. Again, it's just like, you don't like guns and you want to do like the Satyagraha Gandhi thing, by all means. Like me and my crew, we're talking about guns. We want to go get our license to carry and all that stuff. And then again, the benefit of having the group, I don't know if anybody's tried to buy ammunition lately, but it's really expensive, 80 cents or $1 a round. And if you buy in bulk, like 500 rounds or 1,000 rounds or more, it's less expensive. So you have your group of 8 or your group of 64. You're like, hey, it sounds like 3 of us have 9mm guns. Maybe the guys that don't have guns should buy 9mm, so we can all chip in and buy stuff. And then another important thing is to have a bug out plan. Like when shit hits the fan, shit's basically hitting the fan all over the country. But if shit hits the fan even worse, have a bug out plan. Maybe someone in the group of 8 has 5 acres out of town, y'all can go there, or maybe everyone doesn't even go together. So that's like the core things that I encourage, just so we have a foundation of stability because things are getting bad, but it doesn't have to be that at all. And as you can see, this Freedom Cell concept can be utilized for all sorts of goals, like a homeschool co-op, for example. I don't know if anybody's followed up with what's going on in public schools these days. The school starts on October 5th in AISD, and they're spraying this stuff. Turns out it's MMS. Anybody familiar with MMS, chlorine dioxide? It's actually a really cool alternative remedy. So I was like, they're spraying chemicals and stuff. And then I went and looked, and it's like chlorine dioxide. It's like, oh, I actually drink that stuff. Maybe it's not such a big deal. But it's all masks and social distanced. And if you have an authoritarian teacher, you know they're really going to crack the whip when the kids are just a little bit too close. So if parents are concerned about that, you form an intercadre group of 8, and it's like, okay, we're going to go over to Susie's house on Tuesday. She's going to lead the classes. On Thursday, Joey's going to lead the classes, and you can come up with common goals around children and family. You can have a parenting group where they rotate childcare so the parents can go out on a date. They go do play dates together, right? You can have a group that focuses on spiritual growth, or your group does multiple different things, right? You focus on spiritual growth. You get together and meet weekly. You do yoga together. You do meditation together. You're accountability partners for one another. You have little circles where you're vulnerable and you share all that stuff. Health and wellness. You exercise together. I'm not a fan of this, but I throw it out there. Political folks can use this as a means of organizing, lobbying, and so on and so forth. Like if you have a group of 64 people, don't go to the Capitol on the same day. Rather, send in a group of 8 every other day. So the lawmakers are like, dang, there sure are a whole lot of people. Yeah, it's that's a Sun Tzu. Power's not what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. And then intentional community is something that's really important. A lot of people in this organization, in this network, are really excited about the idea of buying property together, moving out there together, and building their own little thing. And so you can use the intercadre goals, or you have 64 people and it's like, we would really like to chip in and buy a piece of property together. Everybody chips in 20K or 10K. Now all of a sudden we can accomplish that. And then one thing that I definitely want to do is I don't have traditional health insurance. I have a health share with this company called Zion. There's all sorts of religious health share programs, and they make you agree. They're like, you have to sign a thing that says you go to church and you pray all the time and stuff, which I don't do, except I come to the Ministry of Sacred Geometry.
Yeah.
But I found one that's secular, and essentially I pay like $205 a month. And if there were to be some emergency, I'm responsible for up to $1,000, like a deductible, but everything else is covered. And so as this network scales, and we have 1,000 people or 10,000 people, there's no reason why we can't form our own health share. There was one actually called Liberty Health Share. It has terrible reviews, so we'll call it something else, Sovereign Health Share. And the organization could choose to create an actual legal entity, or it could be like an agorist off book done with cryptocurrency type thing, whatever people think is the best idea. But I think that's something that this network could really realistically do in a year or two. We have our own health share program where we support one another. There's a naturopathic doctor in the room. It could be like, hey, in our group of 64, here's the naturopath that we go to that we visit. Another use case is people are falling on hard economic times. So Michael lost his job 2 weeks ago. He has rent coming up and he's really struggling to pay. Rather than going to Uncle Sam for a handout, he goes to the community for a hand up. And it's like, hey guys, I'm $500 short on rent. You have a group of 64. 64 divided by 500 isn't a whole lot of money. We can help support one another through those difficult times. Another thing, this is where I want to go with it, but if people aren't down for that, that's cool. Let's say there's a family that gets busted by the police for smoking cannabis or something, and the CPS gets involved and wants to take their kids. Well, you have a group of 64, or better yet, you have a group of 544, and we have our own little communication chain or Liberty Bell alert system. And it's like, hey, there's a sheriff and a social worker that showed up. We really need people to support us and show up. You have a group of 500, even if only 5% of the people show up, that's 25 people. They form a human chain around the door or whatever. And they show up and they're like, hey, we're not going to allow you to take this young lady. These are peaceful people. They're good people. If you're going to take them, you got to take all of us. You got to go through all of us or whatever. That's actually where I see a lot of it's going. I find the current system to be wholly unethical, and I don't want to subsidize it anymore. I pay income tax like a good little serf, and I hope that one day we can reach strength in numbers where we have 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people, and we sign like a Declaration of Independence, and we're like, we're no longer going to participate in your tyranny anymore, and we're all united, and we all have each other's back. And so I don't know where this could go. And again, it's an open source idea. This is just some of the things that we're doing now, some of the things that I see valuable. And I really would want to invite you guys to come along. So I'm going to turn off the feed that's on YouTube. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to chat with our Texas peeps. Bye.